It was a beautiful morning on the 15th of January 1947, and an unsuspecting mother had decided to take her child on a walk. As she was passing by Leimert Park in LA, something strange caught her eye in the bushes just a few feet away from the sidewalk. She leaned in to take a closer look and was horrified to find the body of a young, naked woman, sliced clean in half at the waist. The woman was so pale and posed in such a way that the mother first thought it was a mannequin, but when she realized what she was actually looking at, she quickly called the authorities and thus began the investigation of one of the most famous and mysterious cases in history. Born on the 29th of July 1924 in Boston, Massachusetts, Elizabeth Short was the third of 5 daughters to parents Cleo and Phoebe. Elizabeth was 6 years old when her father's car was found abandoned on the Charlestown Bridge. Everyone assumed that he must have taken his life by jumping in the Charles River. Phoebe, now a single mother, began working as a bookkeeper to support all 5 of her children. When Elizabeth was 15, she underwent lung surgery due to severe asthma attacks and bronchitis. Worried for her health, doctors suggested she temporarily relocates to a milder climate, so her mother sent her to spend winters in Miami, Florida, with some family members for the next 3 years. Fast forward to 1942, when Elizabeth's mother receives an apology letter from her dead husband, where he reveals that he had started a new life in California. Anyway, despite this, at age 18, Elizabeth moved to California to live with her father. This led to multiple quarrels and arguments, and because of the time they lived in, her father had just assumed that Elizabeth would do all of the housework. And that led to even bigger arguments, which led Elizabeth moving out of her father's house. In January 1943, she got a job as a civilian clerk in Camp Cook, near Lompoc. At this time, it is said that she briefly lived with a U.S. Army Air Force sergeant who reportedly abused her. She left Lompoc and moved to Santa Barbara. On the 23rd of September 1943, Elizabeth was arrested for underage drinking at a local bar. Because of this, the juvenile court ordered her to return to Medford, but she moved to Florida instead, making only occasional visits to her family near Boston. In Florida, she met Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., a decorated U.S. Army Force officer. They fell in love, and he had asked for Elizabeth's hand in marriage in a letter while deployed and recovering from plane crash injuries in India. Elizabeth happily accepted his offer and told her friends, but sadly, Gordon lost his life in a second plane crash on the 10th of August 1945, less than a week before the war ended. This tragedy prompted Elizabeth to move to Los Angeles in July 1946, where she started working as a waitress and rented a room near the Florentine Gardens nightclub on the Hollywood Boulevard. In 1947, she took a short trip to Santiago with a man named Robert Red Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman she had been dating. He stated that on the 9th of January, he dropped her off at the Baltimore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, where she intended to meet her sister. It was a beautiful morning on the 15th of January 1947, and an unsuspecting mother had decided to take her child on a walk. As she was passing by Leimert Park in LA, something strange caught her eye in the bushes just a few feet away from the sidewalk. She leaned in to take a closer look and was horrified to find the body of a young, naked woman, sliced clean in half at the waist. The most chilling mutilations, however, were the lacerations on her face. The killer had sliced each side of her face from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating what's known as a Glasgow smile. Horrified by the scene, the woman quickly called the authorities, and one of the most famous murder mystery cases in history was opened. There are images of the crime scene online that I decided not to include in this video because of, well, their very graphic nature. But if you're morbidly curious, they are very easy to find. Be warned though. The body had already been washed clean, and that led LAPD detectives to conclude that she must have been killed elsewhere and then dumped in Leimert Park. Elizabeth Short was identified by her fingerprints, and an autopsy was performed on January 16th. There were marks on her body that indicated that she had been bound and tortured, and her official cause of death was deemed to be cerebral hemorrhage and shock. News about Short's murder began to spread, and newspapers started referring to her as the Black Dahlia due to her strikingly dyed black hair and the black clothing she wore. Unsurprisingly, her story made headlines for weeks. On the 24th of January, a suspicious manila envelope addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers was discovered. Inside the envelope was a letter composed out of newspaper clippings that said, "Here are Dahlia's belongings." And with it came Elizabeth's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, a bunch of names written on pieces of paper, and an address book. Every single item was wiped with gasoline, effectively removing fingerprints. Authorities believe that this envelope must have come from the murderer. The FBI also got involved by checking the records of potential suspects and conducting interviews across the nation. Based on the suspicions that the murderer may have been skilled in dissection because of the clean cuts on the body, agents also checked a group of students at the University of Southern California Medical School. Meanwhile, the LA Examiner, trying to get as much information on Chart as possible, contacted her mother, who had absolutely no clue about her daughter's death, pretending that Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. After getting all they could from Phoebe, they revealed the awful truth of their daughter's demise. As Elizabeth's history became more known, people began branding her as a sexual deviant. One, mind you, police report even said that because the victim knew around 50 men and was seen with at least 25 in the months preceding her death, she was a known teaser of men. Great investigating. Top-notch discovery. Anyway, on the 26th of January, another letter arrived, this time handwritten, and it read, "Here it is, turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun. Black Dahlia Avenger." The letter included a location. The police waited at the appointed time and place, but of course, no one showed up. After standing the police up, the alleged killer sent yet another letter composed out of newspaper clippings that said, "I have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." This one was also wiped down with gasoline, so no fingerprints could be lifted. As time went on, the case went cold and many people just assumed it was a date gone wrong, and after almost 70 years, her case still remains open. So who killed the Black Dahlia? Over the years, a number of chilling and interesting theories have emerged. So solving the murder obviously became a top priority for the LAPD, especially with all of the media coverage that the case got. At a certain time, the police even became desperate to catch the killer. The authorities became interested in a man called Leslie Dillon, who contacted the police that an acquaintance might have been behind the Black Dahlia murder. At the time, the police believed that Dillon might have DID and that the acquaintance was actually one of Dillon's personalities or alters. Of course, they brought him in and tried to get a confession out of him, only to find out that he was indeed talking about a real person who turned out to be innocent. Dillon ended up suing the LAPD for their illegal tactics in trying to pin Elizabeth Short's murder on him. Another popular theory links Elizabeth Short's murder to the Cleveland torso murders that rocked Cleveland, Ohio between 1934 and 1938. Most of the victims' bodies were dismembered, and just like the Black Dahlia case, the cuts were surgically precise. On the other hand, one of the more ridiculous theories, if I say so myself, came from Elizabeth's childhood friend named Mary Pacqua. She had grown tired and angry over how her murdered friend was portrayed and depicted as a promiscuous Hollywood flirt that no one would miss. So she decided to take matters into her own hands and conclude an investigation of her own. So she comes up with the theory that the man behind the Black Dahlia case is none other than Orson Welles.
The French.
She claimed that he had a diphasic personality that turned his creative frustrations into violence, and her evidence was just as ridiculous as her theory. She based her claims on odd incidents from various biographies and a movie set decorated with mutilated mannequins. Of course, investigators did not take these theories seriously at all. The most plausible theory comes from a now retired LAPD detective named Steve Hodel. Shortly after his father's death in 1999, he was going through his belongings when he noticed two photographs of a woman who very much resembled Elizabeth Short. This triggered alarm bells in Steve's head, and he began investigating his own late father, George Hodel. He went through newspaper archives, witnesses' interviews, and filed the Freedom of Information Act to obtain the FBI files on the Black Dahlia murder. He even hired a handwriting expert to compare his father's writing to the writing on some of the notes sent to the press from the alleged killer. The analysis found a strong possibility that the two handwritings matched, but the results were not conclusive. Another thing that linked Steve's father to the Dahlia case was that he had been a doctor who attended a medical school in the 1930s, a time when they taught a medical procedure called hemicorporectomy. This is a procedure that slices the body beneath the lumbar spine, consistent with the cuts on Short's torso. If all of this wasn't suspicious enough, Steve Hodel had also found a folder full of receipts for constructing work on his childhood home. And in that folder, there was a receipt dated just a few days before the murder. On it was a charge for a large bag of concrete, which coincidentally, or not, was the same size and brand as a concrete bag found near Elizabeth's body. Eventually, Steve compiled all all of his evidence into this book. So what do you think? Who was responsible for Elizabeth's murder? Was it truly George Hodel? Or maybe Mary Pacqua was onto something with the whole Orson Welles fiasco? At one point, the Black Dahlia case was even linked to the infamous Cecil Hotel, who has a reputation of being cursed and isn't known for being overly kind to its guests. This hotel has a truly dark past and is linked to way too many strange incidents. So if you want to find out more, click here and I'll see you there.